everybody, Brendan here, and I wanted to talk about a bit of a different album today. So instead of going towards a new release or something like that, I wanted to talk about a bit of a classic. And in this case, I'm going to be talking about Rush. My favorite band of all time, combination of progressive rock, hard rock, elements of new wave and synth rock, just a whole bunch of different things. But that whole progressive hard rock thing is kind of their signature, especially during their whole 70s, early 80s heyday, you know. Basically everything from like 2112 to Moving Pictures, I would say. So I wanted to talk about them, and the album I wanted to talk about in particular was Permanent Waves, which is my favorite of theirs. The album is very interesting because it's sort of it gives a glimpse into what Rush would be like going forward. They took down the kind of high concept fantasy elements of Hemispheres and A Farewell to Kings in favor of a more new wave influenced sound that still retained that progressive rock sound as well. So you kind of got a bridge, you know, you got the album that bridges the gap between the 70s stuff and the 80s stuff. So it serves as a very interesting experience, and you can definitely hear that album in their future records like Hold Your Fire and Power Windows. So really good stuff, and you know, 6 songs, 35 minutes, all killer, no filler. The track list is so lean, and there's absolutely nothing that you would want to cut from it. Absolutely incredible stuff. So with this record, you still got like a healthy contrast of shorter songs and long pieces, although the long pieces aren't as long as on, again, albums like Hemispheres and Farewell to Kings. The longest song on here is like 9.5 minutes. That's the song Natural Science. And it's still kind of a mini epic in its own right. You still have 3 movements, you know, still has like a concept to it. In this case, it's about environmentalism and how the environment is being ruined and whatnot. But that does actually bring me to one interesting fact about the album, which is that the lyrics are a lot more down to earth than on previous Rush records. The lyrics are a lot more grounded. Neil Peart still has a lot of really good, you know, penmanship. He still has a lot of very kind of complex wordplay and stuff like that. But it's being used on more realistic topics. Free will is, as the title suggests, about the concept of free will. Natural Science, as I said, is about the environment. The most fantastical song on the record would be Jacob's Ladder. And even then, it's not really about the biblical Jacob's Ladder, but rather the weather phenomenon that took its name from that. So, still grounded in realism to an extent. And the music mirrors it so well. You know, it sounds, you know, you got the keyboards that are all, you know, glittery sounding and just, you know, just beautiful alongside the progressive rock instrumentation. And of course, you got the more radio-friendly songs like Spirit of Radio and Free Will, as well as Entre Nous. But even those songs have their fair share of complexity, especially Free Will, which has some of Geddy Lee's absolute best bass lines, and that solo section in the middle is absolutely crazy. All 3 members just go off, like they absolutely they just go nuts. Like there's even a little bit of like a jazz fusion slant going on in that part, as Alex Lifeson just shreds on his guitar the entire way through. And I would also say that Geddy Lee's vocals, for the most part, are more reserved on this album. He kind of started scaling back those high shrieks and stuff like that. With certain songs like Free Will, you can still hear them to an extent, but he really did scale back on a lot of that for a more reserved kind of vocal style that he would follow through most of the band's career going forward. And even though Neil Peart is the one who does most of the lyrics on this record, Geddy Lee does get one song in particular, lyrically, the song Different Strings. Now, it's pretty rare for Geddy Lee to actually do lyrics in general. I mean, he's done a few songs, like Cinderella Man, for instance, but this song is honestly incredible. It's one of my top 5 Rush songs, and probably my favorite ballad of theirs. Incredible guitar work, absolutely just very, very clean, very pristine sounding guitar work. with the exception of the final part where Alex Lifeson goes crazy on the solo again. But Geddy Lee's lyrics in particular about, the breakdown of communication and stuff like that, really interesting stuff, and I think he portrays it very well. And just, I don't know, the writing itself is quite fantastic. So you got all that. What I like about this record is that it's a very nice bridge between the cerebral and the accessible, as well as the emotional, to be honest, because this is the most emotional the band have ever gotten, lyrically, even musically, I would say, in general. Because even in the more emotional songs on previous records, they would still have the more fantasy elements, the sci-fi elements, all the Cygnus X1 stuff. This record, it really tugs at the heartstrings a lot more, and I really appreciate that about it. Even the more energetic songs kind of do that. You have Spirit of Radio, which is just, not to use a pun with the band name, but it really is a rush to listen to. The song is so fun and fast-paced and just, it's absolutely beautiful, and it's definitely been an FM radio standard for a reason. Same with Free Will, for that matter. Despite the complexity of both of those songs and all the meter shifts and the time signature changes, all that kind of stuff, the music is still very accessible. But again, really what pushes this album over the edge for me is the emotion aspect. Because even my second favorite album of theirs, Hemispheres, didn't really have that as much. That album was a lot more about the cerebral nature, It closes off on a 10-minute jazz fusion rock instrumental, La Via Strangiato. This is the record where they keep that technicality, but they hone it into a more emotional sound and a more emotional format, and I think that's really cool to listen to. And to be honest, I don't think they ever captured that balance quite the same way as on this record. Moving Pictures had a lot of that kind of side of them as well, but this is the record that really bridged everything perfectly for me. You have the beginnings of the new wave elements. You have the Police elements, which I'm wearing the shirt right now. You have the Police elements. You have the sort of new wave reggae rock elements. That part in Spirit of Radio where you have the whole reggae rock section near the end. So there's hints at what Rush would become later with albums like Power Windows and Hold Your Fire. But this record does such a great job at bridging their classic era with their later eras. Even timeline-wise, because the album came out in 1980, January 1st of 1980 for that matter. So it was right at the beginning of the 80s. Not only was it the first 80s Rush album, it was one of the first 80s albums in general. So that's pretty cool in its own right, But yeah, the record flows very well too, because you got the first two songs, which are two of the radio singles, which go straight into the epic, the first mini epic with Jacob's Ladder. Then you have two more radio-friendly songs, which go into the final epic, which is the final track of the album. So there's a really nice flow. Everything's very balanced, There's no, the 35 minutes you get aren't really lopsided as far as the flow goes. And of course, the performances are just as stellar as always. We're talking about Rush here. We're talking about one of the best bands as far as technicality goes and just overall musicianship and band chemistry, all that kind of stuff. And you can tell, with how long this lineup had been around at that time. The chemistry was just at an all-time high up at that point. Everybody was just firing on all cylinders. Alex Lifeson still shredding like crazy on the solos, but giving so much nuance during the soft sections. Geddy Lee, as I said, having that more reserved vocal style, but still going for those high notes, those shrieks whenever he wants to and whenever he feels is appropriate. As well as, of course, the bass just being phenomenal on this entire thing. Neil, incredible lyrically, incredible drum-wise. The way he combines technical acumen in his drumming with a more reserved approach, actually, kind of like Geddy Lee's vocals. He does offer more restraint on this record, as you can hear on songs like Different Strings and Entre Nous. So there's a really great combination of technicality and nuance that goes on throughout this entire thing. And it makes for just an incredibly engaging listen all the way throughout. So overall, I would have to give this a 5 out of 5 stars. It's a classic for a reason. I mean, really, when you go back to that those old Rush albums, man, like, especially, I would say personally, from Caress of Steel to maybe like Power Windows, so much classic material on there. And Rush somehow always knew how to adapt to the trends of the times without seeming too desperate to do so, I guess. They always had their own flair to them, even when they explored other genres like new wave and alternative rock and, you know, alternative metal, whatever. Like, they always had their own certain flair to them, which I found very, just, yeah, made for a very engaging discography in general. But to me, this is the peak of that discography. So, yeah, that's all I got today. If you like what you heard, please consider subscribing and liking the video, and I will see you later.